In a town like this, you might think you would come up short on interesting personalities. You may imagine years could pass and you will only discover maybe one or two vaguely eccentric people. However, upon closer observation, the practiced eye will uncover droves of veiled, complex identities, some of whom can push the edge of crazy, and others who haven't even seen that edge for so many years that it may or may not have ever existed for them. Don't get me wrong, these are fine, good-hearted people, folks who would lend you a lawnmower or watch your house while you're on vacation. And on the surface, as far as interests and life choices go, they usually do run in the more mundane circles of society. I'm just saying that underneath this thin facade of conformity, there usually lies a sea of a beautiful grotesquerie. Oddly, the drug enthusiast can outwardly seem somewhat extraordinary, but substance by its nature tends to eventually destroy identity instead of enhancing it. I guess if I hadn't ever fallen for the illusion of being vastly different than those who I'd grown up with, I never would have thought of seeking more diverse avenues of association. However, youth is a time of illusion, and the young always convinced of their uniqueness. I was a smart kid, and my parents in turn thought I was something special. I went to college and studied some pretty ordinary stuff while still maintaining my supposed superiority to the herd, all the while envisioning bigger and better things than Plainfield's single movie theater and bowling alley. Plainfield, that's the name of my hometown, was a little nest of Georgia's finest tucked away somewhere near the bustle of Atlanta, hidden in the rustic backcountry. Plainfield, by the way, also was the name of the town which spawned legendary serial killer Ed Gein, a fact which means little or nothing to the people who reside here. When I graduated high school, I knew for certain that Plainfield was a thing of my past, and I would never walk back into its shabby little confines again. As it would inevitably be revealed, I was dead wrong. Upon achieving my goals in the realm of higher education, I promptly found myself unemployed and with no real plans. As you may have guessed, it wasn't long before my old room at my parents' house was once more inhabited by none other than its previous resident. I had learned a valuable lesson while I was in Atlanta for those 4 years. I wasn't as special as I had been led to believe. You may have noticed that I have not yet introduced myself, and the reasons for this will become clear as I continue. But for now, I will refer to myself by my childhood name, Trick, a title I earned after a brief phase in my early adolescence when I had become convinced my future lay in the realm of stage magic. Upon my return from college, I was greeted by several old acquaintances, and I soon fell into nonsensical partying life, which would have been mildly appropriate for a high school junior, but was ridiculous for a young man now fully into the years of adulthood. I will not go into many details, but suffice to say my time became consumed with a lot of drinking, girls, and drugs. Ironically, I had become a prime example of the kind of boring small-town waste I have previously looked down on with utter disdain. What is it about the word never which provokes the comedy of fate to insist on teaching hypocrisy to its users? I was already a full 2 years into this mindless expense of time and energy when old Granny Creek passed away, and her home was inherited by some distant relation from Savannah. The ancient structure was only a few blocks down the street from my parents' house, and it was a warm, rainy spring when I saw the first moving van arrive. I was just stumbling home from another all-night debauchery when I noticed the first batch of cages being carried into the house from the back of the trailer. At first, I had to squint in the early morning fog to assure myself I was actually seeing an absurd number of animal carriers, complete with inhabitants, being carried across the rickety board to the front porch. I leaned against a moss-laden tree and lit a cigarette as I watched a veritable zoo being transferred behind the peeling white painted walls of the rundown building. In my dull, inebriated state, I tried to identify each creature of the cornucopia, but found their variety and obscurity beyond my abilities to classify. After only a few minutes, I grew weary of this, and grinding my cigarette into the damp grass, continued on my way home, resolving myself to check in later. Despite this vow, it would be a full week before I would remember anything about that morning in particular. It was a Sunday afternoon when my mom handed me a loaf of banana bread and said, "Trick, take this over to the new neighbors and welcome them to the neighborhood." I would like to say that she actually used my real name, but that would be a lie. "What neighbor?" I asked as I slipped on my large, yellow-tinted, high-weight patrolman sunglasses. "The one who moved into Granny Creek's old house," she answered, rolling her eyes with irritation. As realization dawned on me, I took the aluminum foil-wrapped loaf and left. Normally, I would have blown off such an errand. I would have taken the loaf, gotten high at the park, and then eaten it myself. But the faded memory of the cage menagerie was feeding my curiosity. When I got to the house, I was imagining what kind of person would collect such a diverse and motley assortment of animals. I thought of zoologists, animal hoarders, and weird horror movie type serial killers as likely candidates. As it turned out, I was partly right on all three accounts. I was also partly wrong. As I rang the old 50-style doorbell, I waited with nervous anticipation as I heard heavy bootsteps within. The wooden door slowly opened and I was greeted by the sight of the singularly most interesting person I have ever seen in Plainfield, staring at me through the rusty cat claw unraveled screen. His entire body and face were covered with numerous piercings and tattoos of various animal types. I remembered that I had always been told that Granny Creek was part native. But the gray-haired elderly woman had always seemed culturally ambiguous to me. This man, despite his icy crystal blue eyes, had a look that screamed Seminole more than anything else. "Which one?" he said with a cool but friendly tone as he ran a brush somewhat effeminately through his straight waist-length black hair. Yeah, man, I live down the street, and Mom's sent me with this banana bread to welcome you to the block." "Cool, I love that shit." He opened the door and looked around outside suspiciously before gesturing for me to enter. I walked in and immediately noticed the house was filled with a dizzying array of aromatic components. I smelled animals, sweat, and weed most instantly as he led me through the living room to the kitchen. Although I recognized most of the furniture from my few childhood visits to Granny Creek's, I also detected that every available space and corner was now filled with cages and aquariums of every size and shape. I had to remind myself to keep following the shirtless, camouflage cargo shorts wearing modern primitive, and not to just stop and begin staring at the fascinating collection of snakes, birds, rats, and fish. I found my host gathering beers from the antique latch-handled refrigerator. He sat down and gestured to the bread as he placed the beer across from me. "Do you partake?" he asked. For a moment I thought he was offering something besides bread, but disregarded the thought as he began to unfold the foil. "I most certainly do," I answered as I sat down and took several long swallows of the cold brew. This was turning into an awesome day. "Good. Let's get a buzz going and eat that bread." He was smiling slyly. Any awkwardness I felt at his bizarre appearance was obliterated. I had already decided I liked my new neighbor. "What's your name?" he asked casually before he stuffed a large chunk into his mouth and then, leaning over the counter, grabbed a bottle of wild turkey. "People call me Trick. What about you?" "Alan Creek," he answered as he took a pull straight from the bottle before offering it to me. "I'm sorry about Mrs. Creek. How are you related?" "She was my great aunt," he answered as his face flushed red with the kick of the hard liquor. "Wow, and she left you her house?" I said, taking the bottle carefully. "She practically raised me for 3 summers. I called every week and visited every Christmas. Turns out that was about 10 times more than her kids and her grandkids." "They must be pretty pissed," I laughed as I almost choked on an overly ambitious gulp of fiery brown whiskey. "You have no idea. She also left me about 80 grand in a savings account." "Holy shit." I gotta say though, man, by the looks of your collection out there, you don't look like you're strapped for cash to start with. I'm not. I already gave like half of it to the ANAA. What's that? Abused and Neglected Animals of America. Yeah, you must really got a thing for animals. I like to be righteous about it, but the truth is, I'm just obsessive. I like dangerous animals. I get off on having them around, and the rarer and more deadly, the better. So, all those snakes in the living room? Oh yeah, you don't want them getting loose, trust me. It's cool though. I managed to turn it into a career. I more or less run an entire network of exotic animal trade on the internet. It's very lucrative, and I'm doing what I love. There are a lot of people like me out there, and they like some really weird shit. Come here, I'll show you something. Ellen stood and led me back into the parlor, where a massive aquarium was standing as a centerpiece of the high-ceiling, wooded-floored room. Swimming lazily in the 60-gallon tank was what appeared to be an enormous black catfish whose whiskers had evolved into what appeared to be completely prehensile tentacles. "What the hell is that?" I said, as I cautiously approached the side of the tank and met the black stare of its occupant. This is a catfish, which originally was bred in a fishery in China beside a nuclear test facility. The man who owned it thought that the mutations were going to put him out of business, and instead it made him rich. I've personally sold about 30 of these things in the past year alone. The only thing is that they don't ever stop growing until they die. I've heard stories that once they got too big for the aquariums, a couple of them had been released in the lakes and rivers here in the States. So if you start hearing rumors about giant monster fish attacking swimmers, you might want to avoid those areas. These things are so aggressive it ain't even funny. Then, as if to prove Alan's point, the huge creature lunged at the side of the tank with the force of a mallet and pounded its head against the glass with a solid thud. I leapt back and heard Alan chuckling before he was interrupted by the buzz of his cell phone from its holder on his belt. Taking the phone, he eyed it with interest before putting it back in place. "Look, man, I gotta run, meet someone. But you should come back by. I don't know anyone in town, and it's good to have someone to shoot the shit with." "Sure, it's not like I got plans or anything." "Cool, stop back by tomorrow, and I will show you some really interesting things. And if your mom has any more baked goods she'd like to unload, I'd be more than happy to take them off her hands, especially if it happens to be an apple pie." I said my goodbyes and left drifting down the street in the days of alcohol, feeling like a kid who had just met his new best friend for the summer. At home, I told my mom her banana bread was a hit and that our new neighbor would love an apple pie. My mother, always one to oblige a fan, began baking almost immediately. The next day, I was crestfallen when my dad commandeered my services for the cleaning of the garage. My dad had been a mechanic his entire life, and now in his retirement had yet to release his gearhead ways. From an old Italian family, he had already endured 2 heart surgeries and had finally relinquished 2 of his greatest loves, smoking and a rich diet of old country dishes. With the loss of these 2 joys, he had determinedly refused to abandon his constant tinkering and rebuilding of old automobiles. Much to his aggravation, my mother had casually begun using his garage as a storage space for her winter's leftover boxes and bought unused QVC items. This required a yearly cleanup and yard sale for which my services were not required. As he worked, he began his usual ongoing narrative concerning various car restoration projects and the difficulty of finding parts for older model vehicles. Having already secretly medicated myself, I nodded politely and listened as if I knew what he was talking about. I knew that I had been a disappointment in regards to any mechanical prowess, but I did respect the man enough not to disregard his passions. After all, it had been his money that had provided me with the education I was now in the process of wasting. Upon successfully organizing and pricing most of the items, I was freed at last to rush off like an excited school kid to my new friend's house. I grabbed the apple pie Mom had made and rushed off just as the dusk began to fall over the massive elms that ran along the sidewalks of the street. As I approached the house, I saw smoke rising in a spiral from the backyard and found Alan standing over a massive barbecue grill on the freshly mowed grass beside the long wooden fence of Merlot grapes which Granny Creek repeatedly used to make homemade wine. By his side, on a folding table, was a plain, unlabeled wine bottle and glass half filled with dark burgundy liquid. "Hey buddy, I was wondering if you were gonna make it. I thought I was gonna have to eat all these ribs by myself." The smell of sizzling meat was intoxicating as he handed me the bottle from the table. "Drink up, bro. That's the good stuff, fresh from Granny's cellar. I read online that this is supposed to be an awesome year for grapes. I think I might try my hand at some winemaking. You know, keep the tradition rolling." I took a long pull from the bottle and found the dry wine bitter on the first drink, but after 2 more pulls I began to detect the deeper, earthy sweetness. "Yeah, I had some stuff to do at the house. I had to help my old man clean out the garage. Hey buddy, family always comes first. That's why I always try to keep in touch with Granny. When my folks passed away in a car accident, she was the only one who gave a shit. She was really the only family I had, her and my animals. I can't believe that you spent summers here and I never met you," I said, sitting down in a lawn chair and taking another fruity sip from the bottle. "You probably did, but you just don't remember. I was a lot different back then." "What did you look like?" Short, fat Indian kid with big blue eyes and horn-rimmed glasses." "Holy shit, man, you're the dog walker." "Now you got it. Yeah, I had quite the business going there for a while. Lots of folks got that dogs that need walking. Yeah, you used to stumble around with a whole pack of mutts. I bet you and your buddies made fun of me a lot. I'm not gonna say there weren't some jokes, but you never got picked on, right? Oh man, compared to my foster home in Savannah, this place was paradise. That's why I came back. My accountant was all like, sell it, make a bundle. And I was like, fuck that, I'm going home. Hey, help me put this food inside. I got a potato salad in the fridge. We sat down in the dining room with the feast laid out complete with bong hits and more of Granny's homemade wine. Alan had also introduced a new home entertainment center and surround sound speakers in every room. He had put on a new album download from a band in Savannah known as Raven Eye. Conversation was limited to movies and music until we had finished gnawing on the last few remaining rib bones. All right, man, now for the real entertainment. How many things like that fish you got here? I said with gleeful stoned interest. More than you would ever guess, bro, he replied with shiny, bloodshot blue eyes. Come on, we'll start in the living room. There is no way possible that I can describe or remember all the creatures and stories that Alan walked me through in that old house. There was a giant tarantula-like spider the size of my hand with bright violet fur and a diamond-shaped blue pattern on its thorax. Alan said that this had been specially bred by an entomologist in Australia. The creature was so poisonous that it could not even be handled without its toxins invading through human skin pores. Inside a massive black iron cage was what appeared to be a small capuchin monkey, who Alan explained was the last of a series of lab experiments that had rendered the animal with a unique and cunning intellect, but intensely aggressive demeanor. I told Alan that I knew he was just messing with me until it leapt to the side of the cage and extended its hands, a complex series of gestures. Looking me in the eyes, Alan said, "He just signed Caesar Hungry." I looked at Alan with astonishment. Yeah, I named him Caesar as a joke. I lay him out, but he likes knives too much. Alan rubbed a long, jagged scar on his arm as if remembering a particularly unpleasant event. "How do you get these things, man?" I said, as I eyed a massive albino python that suddenly fanned out a cobra's hood over its head and spat a long stream of venom at the glass of its aquarium. money and contacts, bro. I represent some really rich people, man, and what they want, they are willing to pay really big bucks for. I have a computer program I designed myself that delivers about 1,000 malware viruses a day to constantly comb the web for any leaked information concerning shady scientific experimentation and weird accidents involving animal research. But that's not the cherry on the sundae. Sometimes I find something so crazy that no one even knows where it comes from. I just so happen to have something like that in the attic, if you care to see. The look on my face answered his question. Ellen had converted the entire attic into what I can only describe as a small indoor growing facility. There were trays laid out in rows across the floor beneath heat lamps, in which there grew everything from marijuana to poppies. Also mixed with these mundane plants was other more exotic flora, which I could not have identified without online access. In the center of the other, all this was an enormous ornate ceramic pot enclosed with wire mesh fencing which ran from the floor to the ceiling. In the middle of the enclosure was a wooden trellis on which there grew a long green vine spotted with beautiful orchid-like red and violet blossoms. "You're into flowers too," I said as I began to step towards the plant for a closer look. Alan stopped me with the one long muscle-corded arm on which a mamba was tattooed from his wrist to his elbow. "This ain't just a flower, bro. What you see before you is the greatest oddity the world of botanical science has not yet discovered." "Where is it from?" I said, backing away, as I noticed a set of rat cages stacked in the corner. "North Korea, from what I understand. 7 years ago, they had a freak storm that nearly devastated a small tract of farming communities. By all accounts, it was quite the light show. I've been told that the lightning was flashing in different colors and that it was blasting away trees like it was God's own shooting gallery. Villagers said that they saw a funnel cloud the size of 3 city blocks touch down in the jungle. A week later, when a few farmers wandered out there to inspect the damage, they found a field that had been leveled to the ground by wind and lightning. Running all along the fallen trees and scorched earth was a series of vines they couldn't identify. They didn't think too much of it at first, but within a few weeks when they returned, they found the vines had bloomed into these weird little orchids. So that was strange enough, but what the farmers witnessed sent them into a fit. Clouds of insects were swarming over the vines, like they were drawn by some kind of magnetic pull. The flowers were ejecting some kind of pollen into the air that the bugs couldn't resist, and when they landed on the blossoms, though, the petals would close over them. "It's like a Venus flytrap, right?" I said, staring at the vines with disbelief, thinking I could almost see them moving on the trellis. "Yeah, but with an added benefit. The farmers noticed that when they caught a whiff of the pollen, it made them feel very good." "The pollen gets you high?" "Like you wouldn't believe. We're talking full-on auditory and visual hallucinations and euphoria beyond anything I have ever experienced. You tried it." "Hell yeah, that's why I wanted it. See, when word got out that these things not only reduced the insect population, but packed a healthy buzz, as well as that lunatic dictator that's running things over there decided he wanted some for his personal flower garden. The thing is that they didn't really understand the nature of it. See, it gets big really fast. I mean, it's a vine. You cut off a piece and you stick it in some water, and that thing will be 5 feet long in a few days." "Like a philodendron?" I said with pride at remembering the name of the weird plants that my mom had growing all over the house. "Exactly, but there's a catch. As the vines get thicker, the blossoms get larger too. And as it gets bigger, it starts eating bigger things. I guess the North Korean guy got a little pissed off when a couple of his house pets ended up this thing's dinner and decided to bomb the entire field where they came from. Luckily, a few villagers and soldiers realized that they could make a fortune, saved a few little shreds. I bought them all last year. So what do you think, bro? You want to try it?" I stared at him dumbly. "What? Pollen?" Yeah, man. You've never felt anything like it, I guarantee. Well, sure, I love to, but how? I watched as, smiling like my dad would as he revealed one of his latest restorations, Alan walked over to the rat cages and withdrew a single long squeaking rodent, which he attached on a long pole with a clamp device on the end. Opening a small door in the wire mesh, he proceeded in extending the white pole within and dangling it before several of the lovely red-violet blossoms. I watched with fascination as the petals seemed to slowly turn in the direction of their victim and issued a thick cloud of sparkling golden dust, which seemed to evaporate in the air. "Breathe deep, bro," Alan said as the first soft floral scent reached my nostrils. As I began to feel the tingling and uplifted, I watched with intense and unwavering awe as several long, stringy tendrils reached out at the now calm and giddy rat and drew it in, softly enclosing it in the petals in an almost loving embrace. How long will it take for the rat to die? I was giggling despite what should have been a horrible scene unfolding. Days and days. It's a fucking horror show, man. It secretes this acid that dissolves them slowly, and then he had to stop for his laughing. It just melts them down. I think they're so stoned they don't even notice. He now had to grip his stomach as his laughter increased to violent, gut-wrenching spasms. Come on, dude. We gotta get out of here. If you stay for too long, then the plant starts to look so pretty you want to touch it. He closed the door and took my arm as we stumbled down the steps. We spent the rest of the night undergoing the most vivid and beautiful hallucinations I have ever experienced. There was no fear or anxiety in this new world. There was only soft, warm light as every sound became a distant song, and every object became an intriguing and rich new experience to behold. I had become blissfully unaware that I was actually surrounded by the most deadly creatures I had ever come into contact with. My mom's apple pie was exquisite. By morning, the visions had subsided, and I returned home in the euphoric aftermath of the strange and wonderful new drug. I couldn't wait to return to Ellen's and get another dose of the extraordinary beauty I had experienced. However, while I was gone, tragedy had struck. My father had experienced a heart attack while trying to work on the transmission in the '81 Ford pickup he had recently acquired from a junkyard by himself. I found a frantic note on the refrigerator telling me to come to the hospital in Atlanta as soon as possible. I checked my cell phone, which had been turned to vibrate in my pocket, and found that I had over 20 missed calls throughout the evening. Even sitting in the waiting room at the ER, I could not help but think of the heavenly bliss I had experienced in the old house back in Plainfield. We stayed at a hotel in the city as we waited to see if my dad's condition would improve. After 2 days, my mom asked me to return to the house and grab a few things for her. Driving back on the interstate, I heard a radio report warning that a hurricane had been spotted moving in off the Gulf Coast. People were told to evacuate certain areas, and Plainfield was on the list, which the automated computer voice read out over several long minutes. I thought of Alan and drove to his house as soon as I made it back into town. I ran up to his front porch even as the sky was growing cloudy and the wind blew the elms forcibly in a tormented dance. I pounded on the door, but could draw no answer from within. I rang the doorbell several times before trying the latch and finding it unlocked. And immediately I noticed the smell. Everywhere throughout the house hung a thick cloud of golden dust, which whirled in small cyclones in the wind, which rushed through the open windows. My terror turned to wonder as the pollen began to take effect, and I noticed that on every surface, in every corner, and growing over every cage was the long, green, leafy ropes of the Korean vine. The cages and tanks had been invaded, and huge wondrous blossoms peacefully wrapped the natives within. Laughing, I stumbled through the living room and by chance passed the monkey cage where little Caesar hung suspended, an enormous blossom staring at me with blank and cloudy eyes. Sorry, little guy. Maybe if you got loose, you could have knifed it, huh? I laughed at my joke as I went through the kitchen and watched as several long strands of ropey vine lurched from the refrigerator menacingly. The blooms seemed to sway and undulate before me in a mesmerizing and hypnotic pattern. No, 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 now, I chided. It's not polite to eat the house guests. I moved to where I remembered Alan saying his bedroom was, and found the door open with several long trails of the reaching horror growing along the floor. The room was dark and the shades pulled as I squinted at the bed and saw a jumble of blankets piled on the four-poster frame. I walked forward and pulled them back to find Alan curled with fetal ball half enclosed in a soft blanket of several enormous petals. His flesh appeared to be soft and spongy, as several areas were bare of skin altogether, and revealed exposed patches of raw muscle and sinew beneath. To my surprise, he began to roll over, and I laughed hysterically when I saw that the left portion of his face was now pink bone, all along the line of his jaw and cheek. His blue eyes opened, and he stared up dazedly. Hey, bro. I wondered what happened to you. I waited around all day for you, but when you didn't come back, I got bored and decided to catch a pollen hike by myself. I can see that, I chuckled. Hey, dude, there's a hurricane coming. You need to get out of here. I looked around the room and noticed that several of the blossoms had grown bigger than any I had yet seen, and were moving slowly towards me across the floor. Yeah, I'll be alright. I'm pretty comfortable here in bed. I'll just wait it out. Come on, man. I think you might be in trouble. I was laughing uncontrollably, and now the flowers had rose to the footboard of the bed and appeared to be calling me closer with slow, rhythmic movements. No, that's cool. You can just leave if you want. Or, hey, you can stay too and keep me company. His voice was weak, sleepy, tranquilizing. I really can't. My dad's in the hospital. Oh, hey, that's cool. Family first, bro. Give me a call sometime when you get back. Yeah, I'll do that. Somewhere in the farthest depths of my mind, a voice was urging me to leave. I attempted to pull away from the startling and lovely vision of the flowers, but their call was almost impossible to resist. It was almost as I heard a breaking sound outside as a tree limb slammed into the side of the house that I was able to leave the room. I pulled my shirt over my face and ran laughing through the vine-filled house and out into the storm. It was now raining as I dropped into the driver's seat and heard alarms sounding over the neighborhood. Still feeling in good humor, I almost forgot to start the car as the sound of the siren seemed calm and entrancing. How I managed to drive, I will never know. I cannot even now clearly recall how I made it out of Plainfield, but I awakened the next day stuck in a ditch about 3 miles from Atlanta. We were unable to return to our hometown for many days, and when I did, it was part of the search and rescue teams assigned to comb the wreckage left by the hurricane. Plainfield had been utterly destroyed in the catastrophe. I worked tirelessly for weeks as we sifted through the wreckage, accompanied by several dogs and the latest in human pattern-finding technology. Many had evacuated, but there had been those who had not, and among them, there had thankfully been many survivors. However, Alan's house had been destroyed. The entire block was a ruin of crushed and demolished houses. It had been the last day of our cleanup effort as we loaded our truck that one of my fellow workers called out from a small copse of trees behind what had been the general store. "Check it out," he said, laughing as he pointed down into the ravine, which was filled with the broken limbs of numerous trees. "You ever seen a flower like that?" I stepped back in horror as my heart began pounding in my ears. Yes, I have. I thought of the storm and the winds. I thought of the pollen being carried for miles and miles in every direction. I thought of thousands of torn vines growing on every available surface, and I thought of people too fascinated and drugged to think anything